Hello and welcome to More to the Story with Molly White. I'm so glad you joined me again today. And I just want to before I get started to introduce my co-host and our special guest, I just want to give a shout out to our show sponsor, Dr. Stephen Hotze with the Hotze Health and Wellness Center. We are really grateful for his sponsorship to the show, and we invite you to be a sponsor as well, and or to be a donor to the show because we always like to make improvements and to keep our wonderful producer well paid. So we would appreciate your sponsorship. And now I'd like to introduce Mary Browning and a former guest on our show, Brittany Poppy. Mary and Brittany actually went to Washington, D.C. last week, and they stayed about a week to attend the Defund Big Abortion Lobby Day last Thursday on March the 27th, and to be there when the Supreme Court heard the oral arguments for the South Carolina versus Planned Parenthood case. So it's going to be my honor to interview my co-host, Mary Browning, and our repeated guest, Brittany Poppy. So y'all come on in.
Thank you, Molly. I might just clarify. I went last week. Brittany came this week. So we were, yes.
But both in DC, and you were representing us very well, Mary and Brittany. I'm so honored that y'all were there. And Mary, I just want you to start us off by, I know God called you to go there, and you participated in the Susan B. Anthony Defund Big Abortion Lobby Day. So tell us about that.
Yes, Molly, that was exciting. There were 400 to 500 people, and our role being there was really to canvass as many representatives and senators as we could. And we were educating and advocating on behalf of defunding Planned Parenthood, or defunding really big abortion, in a reconciliation bill through the budget process because of the harm of abortion. And one of the things the Lord gave me while we were there is the phrase, there's nothing healthy about abortion, and there's no care of the women or girls. So I was glad to be part of that, and that sort of army, that sea of people that were there to let our Congress know that we no longer want taxpayer dollars to go to big abortion. There's just nothing good that comes from that. So I was glad.
What kind of a response did you get did you get to meet them in person, or did you get to talk to their staffers, and what kind of a response did you get?
There was some of both of that, Molly. We met with in some offices we met with staff, and in some offices we met with staff and the congressperson. So I would say in every office we were in, there was a positive reception. I think in part because we were planning to just show our support to those people that we know are active in matters of life on the Hill. But also we stopped into a few offices, even when Brittany came on board, and there was another one of our women of Operation Outcry that was with us during that time, Stephanie Jacobson, but she's been on a plane this afternoon, so she wasn't able to join us today. But so we were part of the army of people, mostly women, who were there to speak up about the harm of abortion.
That is awesome. And did y'all have handouts? Because I was thinking, and this is for you, Brittany Poppy, and you probably, you do have a resume or a bio. But I have my testimony, a one-page testimony written in, I think, 7 or 9 different languages. And, having your testimony printed and ready to go wherever you go is such a powerful tool to have, because we only have, I'm sure you only had a few minutes with each of these staffers and these representatives, but being able to hand them your testimony would be something they could read and have for a long time. But that's just a little plug I wanted to put in there. So, and Brittany, let's see, so you did that Tuesday, but you were there, Mary, Tuesday through, and you just got back home early in the wee hours of this morning. So what did you do during the rest of that week?
Well, as I mentioned, last Thursday was the day to be talking about the reconciliation bill and defunding big abortion. And part of that also, I would mention that Brittany and myself and Stephanie, and there were others of us there last week, that were members of Operation Outcry. And if a listener is out there and they have abortion experience, you too can be part of Operation Outcry by going to operationoutcry.org and completing a declaration there. And you can lend your experience also in this battle. And we would invite you to do that. It takes all the boots on the ground, and we're looking forward to joining arms and linking arms with others of you out there. So
Absolutely,
thank you.
absolutely. And uh, declaration is just like a questionnaire that asks you about your abortion experience, but it's used. There was a lot of these declarations that were used in an amicus brief that was filed to
Yes.
support South Carolina, and we're going to talk about that case in a minute. But it's the power of testimony, verbal and written. That's the power of testimony, and people respond to this. They're
Yes.
touched by it, they're moved by it, they're encouraged by it. And so we really invite all of our listeners and viewers who have had an abortion to join us,
Yes.
in this campaign to, for me, is to protect other women. We don't want to see other women who are pregnant and unsure of what to do go through an abortion and get hurt like we've been hurt. And we want to save the baby's lives, because motherhood is the best. But that's, the importance of having our testimonies out there. So, Brittany, so when did you arrive in DC?
Yeah, I got there on Monday, uh, and that was kind of, a quieter day, so was able to get a little bit more acclimated to what we were about to get ourselves into Tuesday and Wednesday. So, yeah.
Awesome. To get prayed up and prepared, get your shield of faith polished, get your belt of truth, tightened, and you had to get on that spiritual armor of God to face, because it's an intense battle, isn't it? The battle between life
Yes.
and death is intense, and it's wicked. And if you're not spiritually prepared, if you don't have your sisterhood or your fellow warriors along with you, it can be quite draining and quite challenging. But the important thing is to show up on the battlefield, but be prayed up and link shields with other like-minded people. So now you're prepared up. And so Tuesday, I know Mary talked about, there was a prayer vigil Tuesday night in front of the Supreme Court. Both of y'all attended that. Tell us about that event.
Yeah, that was a really, really great experience and so impactful. Just seeing everyone that showed up to just really pray over the Supreme Court and the lawyers and the decision that was going to be is going to be made. And they had brought, I believe it was Students for Life. Mary, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they had brought crosses. They had, if I have it correct, it was 1,076 pink crosses
Mm,
representing the amount of lives lost in just one day to
mm,
Planned Parenthood. And just seeing all of those crosses being held up and lined up was so I don't even really know a word to describe that. It just made it so real how many lives every single day
mm,
are being lost to Planned Parenthood. And so I it really impacted me. I'm so thankful to have been able to go and just listen to those that spoke and pray. And two, I am from North Dakota, and I've been to our 40 Days for Life event outside of the abortion facility in my community. We don't have protesters come
mhm,
to our events really. Maybe once in a while someone will come, but they're usually pretty quiet. I think we at one time had someone dress up in Handmaid's Tale and just not say anything and just stand there very weirdly. But this was a different experience because there was one gentleman at this prayer vigil that was just, oh, my heart just breaks for him and the things that he was saying and the vile language he was using. And yeah, it was definitely a different experience that I haven't had before.
mm. Well, I can just kind of see that as demons manifesting,
Hmm.
through people. But what I also see and hear is he was a hurting man.
Mm-hmm.
If you get past all the anger, all the foul language, all of those things, and get down to that man's heart, he's a hurting man, and maybe trying to defend the abortions that he may have encouraged in his past. There's
Mm-hmm.
something going on that provokes that type of anger, has got to be coming from a wounded place. But it's not pleasant to have around. It's not pleasant, to be a part of that. But for me, I have to kind of look through there, because he can be angry at an idea, but being angry at people that he doesn't know is another thing. But I'm so glad you stood strong, and you stood on God's word, and you were there, you were present, you were praying, and in our prayers do not go in vain. God hears our prayer, no matter the rhetoric that comes from it. And so, Brittany, I do want to get back with you, but I want to talk to Mary as well, because I want you to talk to listeners about your first time going to the March for Life and sharing your testimony before the Supreme Court. So we do want to kind of touch on that a bit. But I wanted to get Mary's observation and her experience there at the prayer vigil.
Well, I have to say, Brittany had a much more gracious heart than I did for that protester at the time. I just wanted to take his megaphone and kind of smash it, but because it was so irritating, to be honest. But I agree with you, Molly, that he was hurting, and I think that's Brittany's compassion is recognizing there is some kind of misplaced anger here, and he certainly cannot get pregnant. And so we do pray for him that he would have an encounter with the living God, and that he would be restored in his relationship with God. But it was there were young people, young students, and that was beautiful seeing them there. And there were, as Brittany said, 1,076 pink crosses, and there we held them across in front of the court because we had 1,076 crosses that we were holding up.
Wow.
And I thought that was an incredible image, to think how many babies are lost in one day in the United States. And so it was, I thought, a profound. The Stanton Public Policy Group had actually organized that piece. And the Stanton Public Policy Group is is taking a leadership role in recognizing the harm of abortion and speaking out against it too. So we just want to mention that they had a role to play in that event. And I was just grateful to be there with Brittany, because we're from different generations, but to see her her heart for this issue and willingness to stand means a lot to me, and I think to others of us who have maybe been in the fight a little bit longer. And so just really welcome Brittany and all those people she represents. So thank you, Brittany, for going with us.
Amen.
Yes.
Amen. And getting your first, I guess, star, like being in the Lord's army. I kind of think of it that way, that, every battlefield that God puts us on, and we make it through that battlefield, then we get another star added to our medals. And then soon we're going to get our stripes, like general and lieutenant, you know, major general, all those kind of different stripes. I should know them. My dad's a retired colonel, but that's kind of how I see it, that God puts us in these battlefields to stand up for his kingdom, his righteousness, his truth, to stand up for life. And when we make it through and we're successful in doing what God's called us to do, then we're going to be rewarded. And the star is just kind of a symbol, but we're going to be rewarded in heaven, and our children are rejoicing in heaven. Go, mom, go. you know you're working, you're representing me, you're representing the kingdom of God, you're representing Jesus, and I know that they have to be celebrating in heaven, because we are taking an active role in honoring our children and defending the unborn. So praise God for you. And I'm sorry I wasn't on that battlefield, and but I have been on them, and I know the intensity of it, when you're dealing with the spirit of life and death, and it is such a battle. So now let's kind of, unless you have something else to say
Well,
about the
let me
Tuesday.
I might back up just a minute. In January, Brittany came to the DC and spoke in front of the court. So maybe,
Okay.
do you want to
Yeah,
talk about that
let's do
at the
that
March
now.
for
Okay.
Life?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So that was my first experience in, well, I went to DC when I was in high school, but not for any sort of activism or anything like that. It was more so to look at the monuments and see our nation's capital. So this was my first experience kind of going for a different purpose. And I absolutely loved it and loved how, some observations I've had with, looking at the pro life side versus the pro choice side or pro abortion side is pro lifers can just automatically just be your friend. So you show up and everyone is so welcoming and excited that you're there, and you all know you're there for the same purpose. And I would see interactions with those that maybe weren't on our side, and so much compassion from us for those people. And so it really impacted me, being able to go to the march and just see what God is doing, and what God, I think, really is stirring up in our nation. And I also had the opportunity, yes, like you said, to share my testimony with Silent No More on the steps of the Supreme Court. And I'm so thankful for that experience. That was, I public speak, but that was kind of one of my more, I didn't know what to expect, for that kind of a setting. And it was just really rewarding to see everyone so compassionate and so kind, listening to all of us share how we've been hurt by abortion. And just praying that if there were some in the opposition out there, that they heard that, and maybe that will stir something in their hearts to look at the truth and stop denying the truth. But it was just, yeah, it's an experience that I am so grateful to have, and I have a goal to continue to go to the march whenever I can.
Good. Awesome. And it's so wonderful to see young women like yourself, Brittany, coming out and taking that leadership role and taking that on. Because, Mary and I have done this a long time. I first started, spoke at the Supreme Court. It was a Operation Outcry Silent No More campaign at the time. And that was back in 2002. Yeah, back in 2002. I went to DC in 2001 with Alan. Then I wanted to come back and go to the March for Life. But back in 2001, no, there wasn't a campaign at that time. I think it was around 2006 or so when they started doing that. But it is amazing because you're standing with so many other women and men that had a common experience, but we have the same Lord, and we have the same Redeemer, and we have the same Forgiver, the Healer. So that's exciting. And we do pray that it touches those who hear, even those who are on the opposite side. So thank you for doing that. And did you have, tell us a little bit about um, Wednesday. Wednesday is when the Supreme Court took the oral arguments for South Carolina versus Planned Parenthood, and about Planned Parenthood really versus South Carolina. So, Mary, tell us a little bit about that case, and then about the experience, you and Brittany, about the experience y'all had that day.
Okay. For those that might be looking for it in the media, it's Media versus Planned Parenthood of South Atlantic. Excuse me, Medina versus Planned
Okay.
Parenthood of South Atlantic. But that case did originate in June of 18 when the governor of South Carolina said Planned Parenthood was not a qualified medical provider because their main performance was abortions, and did not want. So he issued an order not to authorize South Carolina taxpayer dollars to to go to Planned Parenthood. So that was kind of the beginning, and that made its way in the last 7 years up to the U.S. Supreme Court to be argued yesterday morning. The point that the court was considering was whether or not whether or not being a Medicaid recipient gave that person it's a technical, but it's a 1983 action against the government to choose the provider of their choice. And so that was the question, whether or not
That would be
the
a healthcare provider, correct?
yeah, well, yes, to choose their own healthcare provider for abortion, and the Medicaid program then would need to pay that provider. So,
Okay.
in the face of South Carolina governor saying Planned Parenthood isn't a qualified medical provider, that meant that they would have a qualified medical provider. That meant that they would have to choose from entities that were not Planned Parenthood. So the premise of the lawsuit was, does a Medicaid recipient have legal standing to sue the state of South Carolina to make sure they get the provider and they can choose Planned Parenthood to provide that abortion if they wanted it. So
Okay.
that was
So
really the question before the court.
okay. So I need a little clarity, and maybe our listeners might need it as
Mhm.
well. Is it a provider for healthcare services like uh, female services, pregnancy, those kind of things, or is it just in particular abortion?
Well, in this case, because the main service provided by Planned Parenthood in South Carolina is abortion,
Right.
the governor said abortion is not health care and you are not a qualified medical provider under our definition. And so because of that, they then Planned Parenthood sued, saying a Medicaid recipient should be able to force the government to pay the provider of their choice for an abortion.
For an abortion. So it's like taxpayer funded abortions.
Exactly. That is exactly what
Okay.
it is. And
That's what
because
it is.
Planned Parenthood isn't the only abortion provider, but it's the biggest abortion provider. And
Absolutely.
so when South Carolina decided that, it doesn't mean that Medicaid recipients wouldn't have other options. But that's what Planned Parenthood sued for, to make sure, trying to force the South Carolina to pay for abortions specifically to Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. Planned Parenthood wants to force us taxpayers to fund abortion. That's what it boils down to, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And,
Yes.
and taxpayers are going, no, I don't think I want to pay for someone's abortion, through Medicaid.
Right.
Right. Okay.
So interesting that last week on Thursday, we were lobbying the federal government not to pay federal taxpayer dollars to big abortion.
Mhm.
And then on Wednesday was that case before the Supreme Court coming out of South Carolina, a very important case. And I think the listeners will want to watch for the court's decision in that matter. But
Absolutely.
outside the court, there was more going on.
Yes, and I was going to say that because I was there during the Dobbs, was it the Dobbs case or other Supreme Court cases that dealt with pro-abortion laws, or abortion providers were suing pro-life laws, and it ended up at the Supreme Court. And there is a plethora of people that show up. You have those who are trying to defend and fight for abortion rights, and those who are pro-life, and there's hardly any space in between the two of us, these two different groups. So now I want Brittany to little touch up on her experience there, because we're going to talk about you, Mary, because you got in to hear the oral
Mhm.
arguments. But I want to start from the outside, then we'll go on the inside. How's that?
Sounds good.
Okay, Brittany. So what was your experience there, and what did you observe, and how did you feel about that?
Yeah, so when we first kind of walked up, things were still getting kind of set up, but I noticed that there were many pro abortion people all over, kind of infiltrating into the pro life space. And a woman even tried to offer me a sign right away. And of course, it's no, no, I don't want that sign. But there was so much joy and hope on the pro life side, worship music, fellowship, just kind of rallying. You could tell that we had all, put on that armor of God to be there that day. And then you look at the opposing side, and oh my goodness, the amount of anger and just vile language. It was so interesting because I know. Mary mentioned Stephanie Jacobson earlier.
Mhm.
I was
Let's
out
have
there
her
with
on. Yeah.
her,
Mhm.
and she was engaging with a woman that was next to us, and this woman was just so angry, and she looked at Stephanie and said, "Your voice doesn't matter." And it's just so interesting because they're out there thinking that they're fighting for women and thinking that they're fighting for all of these civil rights issues, when in all actuality, her telling Stephanie that her voice doesn't matter is not very pro woman. You're only pro these things when they go towards your agenda. So thankfully, they were able to kind of get some of those people out of our space, and things, kind of relatively calmed down a little bit from there, at least on our side. But yeah, it was just very interesting out there.
It is interesting, and from what I'm listening to what you're saying, I can see the light side and the dark side. There's
Yep.
light in it, and the dark does not like the light coming in. And
Mm-mm.
we're talking about it spiritually. They do not like the light coming in. But then again, when you're talking about anger, you're talking about a bunch of wounded, hurting people. I mean, because
Mm-hmm.
I can give testimony to that. Before
Mm-hmm.
I went and dealt with my own abortion, I was angry, especially if someone said abortion was wrong. Oh, it would just blow my lid because I had to justify it. And if I couldn't justify it, that means I'd had to face the truth. And at that time, I could not face the truth. It was too hard. But with Jesus, you know, then you can face the truth because he's there to love you and protect you and forgive you and help you go through the healing process. So, but that's it. That's just my observation of the anger. It's rooted in woundedness,
Mm-hmm.
and but when you bring in the light and bring in the joy, they do step back and reflect. Wow, what do they have that I don't have?
Mm-hmm.
I want what they have. I'm tired of this. And that's what I know fruit is going to come from that. Good fruit is going to come from that. So thank you for being there. And so Mary got inside the lion's den.
Yes, and inside,
You were outside. You were outside the lion's den trying to ward off all the lions, and then Mary just jumped right into the lion's den. So,
yes, yes, there were
so
a
that,
number of
Mary.
us were inside the court, and I want to say that the attorneys, I think the attorneys on all sides did an excellent job uh, advocating for their positions. The So there was an attorney representing the pro-life side, or South Carolina, and there was an attorney representing Planned Parenthood, and there was an attorney representing the Solicitor General's Office of the United States, and their position had changed, the Solicitor General, because of the change in administration. We have a different philosophy now in the Attorney General's Office of the United States. So in that sense, that was the first time I had heard an argument that was actually very favorable from the government, and that was encouraging for me. But I would say there was vibrant, the justices were engaged in the conversation. Not surprisingly, the more conservative justices and the liberal justices had different perspectives, but the liberal justices certainly spent a lot of time uh, indicating that they really believe that an individual who is a Medicaid recipient has a legal right then to sue the government to force them to pay the provider of their choice for abortion. And so that was not the same position that many of the questions of the more conservative justices were asking. So I would say it was a lively and vibrant conversation that took a fair amount of time. And so that was what was going on inside the courtroom. And of course, the attorneys are all very collegial. Even when they're arguing, they're calling my friend on the other side or my friend that argued previously. So it's the bar is interesting for people that are unfamiliar with the way attorneys are, but we can be in court and argue and against one another vehemently and go outside and say, would you like to go to lunch? And so that's just how attorneys can be. We're advocating a position. That doesn't mean that we as persons are enemies. And so I thought it was civil and vibrant inside the courtroom.
Good. And how do you think, from what you observed, the outcome would be?
It's always a little risky to say that, but my own perspective, and while others may differ with this, my own perspective is that the court was there was a lot of technical argument around where's the line, because there's in the Congress didn't use the word right in the ways that they do when it's clear that they're granting someone the right to sue the government to force in a 1983 action type of action, such as in this case to force the ability to choose your own provider independent of what the government might say about that provider. And so there's a lot of technical argument around that. And I had my impression was that those that were thinking if the Congress wanted to do that, they needed to be explicit. I felt like there were more justices that had held that position. So I'm hopeful that the court will come down on the side of saying South Carolina has the ability to determine whether or not they will pay someone that primarily does abortions and nothing much more,
Right.
not a qualified medical provider, and the individual Medicaid recipient that does not give them a right to sue and force the government to pay for the provider of their choice, and also to pay attorney's fees, because in the case like this, that could be very expensive. So that's one of the things that's on the hook for South Carolina in this case.
Absolutely. And we're certainly praying for that case. We're praying for South Carolina. We're praying for the justices of the Supreme Court that they would do what's right in the eyes of the Lord
Yes.
and, not what's right in politics or in their own eyes. And so we're out of time, but I just wanted to let people know that, Brittany is a host of her own podcast, Does God Forgive Abortion? And we certainly know he does. And so I wanted to give a shout out to that. And Brittany, it was really, really wonderful having you on our show again. And we look forward to having you on again in the future. And Mary, thank you thank you both, but thank you, Mary, for going to DC and representing us and the other women from Operation Outcry. And we invite you, if you want to be a part of this amazing team of women who've been saved and delivered and healed from abortion and now are out there sharing the truth, sharing our testimonies and making a difference for the cause of life, we invite you to do that. And you can go to operationoutcry.org and fill out a declaration, and we will be getting in touch with you. So thank you guys for taking time to be interviewed today. Thank you all for listening to More to the Story with Molly White. We look forward to seeing you again next time. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Mhm.